Hi, this is Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. I'm so glad you're here. And I know that once Christmas is over, all I want to do is purge, get rid of everything in the house that is cluttering it up. But before you purge the things that are making you crazy, the things that are broken or no longer of any use, I want you to consider some of these upcycle projects that I have here. I've done upcycle projects in the past, and I'm going to link the playlist here. Some of my favorites are upcycle projects with jeans, like these wreaths and this table runner, but I have a lot with jeans, and also with Christmas cards and Christmas bags. So do check out some of my other upcycle projects for ideas for some things that I'm not going to do in this video. In this video, I'm going to start with an old sweater. And this sweater is one that I wouldn't donate because the neck is all stretched out. But you can see that it has a really pretty pattern on it. It's a sort of a stranded knit sweater. But I'm not going to use that pattern because this is going to be for a Christmas gift. So I have a bottle of wine, and what I want to make out of this sweater is just a wine bag. And I want to make a bag because I just want the gift to be a little bit more special than, hey, I bought you a bottle of wine. Not that there's anything wrong with buying somebody a bottle of wine. They put a lot into their gift for me, so I just want to put a little more into my gift for them. So I slid the bottle of wine into the sleeve of this sweater, and I want to leave enough space at the bottom so that I can sew up the bottom. So I'm just going to cut off the bottom so I have enough space to sew it up. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is just stitch up the bottom, so make a sort of a hem at the bottom of the sweater. I'm going to leave it open on both ends to start. So I'm just folding over the edge where I cut, and I'm just going to run a stitch along that on my sewing machine. Now, what I have here is some red yarn from the Dollar Tree. And I'm going to thread that onto a yarn needle and do just a little bit of simple embroidery on this sweater. Now the sleeve of the sweater is ribbed, so I'm going to take advantage of that and just do a running stitch along the ribbing, but using the ribbing as a guide. And then I just did some V stitches, so every 2 stitches I did a V, and so sort of made a zigzag next. And then you can see here, I decided to do another running stitch under the zigzag, and I used some white yarn and sort of outlined the zigzag. So I was just sort of trying to do something that looked appealing to me. You can probably do better, but I was trying to keep it to some pretty simple stitches as well, because it is hard to do embroidery on something that isn't being held taut. So then I wanted to sew up the bottom of this so that I would know where to put a similar band along the bottom of the sleeve. And I just did a running stitch by hand with some thread and then gathered it and then sewed through it a few times to just make sure it would stay in place. The wine bottle that I have has a divot in the bottom of it, so this gathered part will just fit right into the divot and the wine bottle will sit flat. If you don't have a wine bottle like that, what I was considering doing was putting something flat on the bottom of this, maybe just a piece of felt or even a piece of wood to give it a nice flat bottom, but I didn't have to do that. And then I put the wine bottle in just to get a sense of where I wanted to put the matching band at the bottom of the sleeve. For my embroidery, I started and ended at the seam of the sweater sleeve so that on the inside I could just run the yarn through that seam to sort of tie it off. Now to tie this off, I thought I would add a couple of pom-poms in the red and white yarn. So to do that, I cut about an 8-inch length of the white yarn. That's going to go around the center. And then I took the red and white and wrapped it around 2 fingers. And I think I wrapped about 35 times. So that would mean 70 wraps total because I was wrapping 2 pieces of yarn together. And then slipped that off my fingers and tied the 8-inch strand of the white yarn very tightly around the center. Then snip those loops and then trim that pom-pom down so that it's nice and full. And I made 2 of those. And then I just wrapped the wine bottle in some matching red tissue paper, put it inside the sleeve, and then took some red yarn and just stitched it through the top where I want to tie it and tied it with a bow. And then I just pulled my pom-poms up through that seam area. So basically just stitched them into the inside and tied them on the inside. And here's the bottle. I added a little red tag, which is just from an old Christmas card. And I think that that makes a nice gift. I hope that the recipients like it. Now here is my Christmas tree about a week after I put the Christmas lights on. And this happens to me every year. I always put the Christmas lights on first and give them some time to die because I'm usually putting on last year's Christmas lights, and usually some of them can't make it through the season. So I need to remove these lights. And you can see one strand died completely and one strand died just half of the strand. So that one I sort of left in the tree and just replaced the half. I found this interesting diagram of how lights are wired together. And I just thought that was pretty cool. I'll include a link to this in the description. I always try to fix them. I'm not always successful. So then I'm left with these strands of Christmas lights, and the only option really is to throw them away, or let's take them apart and get some of that copper out of them. So this one that I have here, this is a strand of 100 lights. And so these are, according to the diagram and according to what I discovered as I cut it apart, basically 2 sets of 50 lights that are wired together in parallel. So what I did was cut the plugs off, and then I unwrapped them. And when you unwrap them, you will get one cord which has all of the lights on it, and that one I'm not going to use. And then you'll get 2 shorter cords that you'll have to cut in the middle, and 1 long wire. So what you have here is copper wire with the sort of rubber insulator over it. And now you don't need a wire stripper to do this. You can use a knife or scissors. I have a wire stripper, so I used a wire stripper to strip off the end of the wire, but I think it would be very difficult to strip the entire wire with the wire stripper. What I have found when I've done this is that the copper is very fragile on the inside. So I've tried to just kind of rip the copper through the wire, and every time I've done that, you can rip for a while and you think, oh, this is easy, just rip this right out. It rips right through that insulation, but no, then eventually the copper breaks. I guess depending on how long a piece you want, that might work. So what I ended up doing was a little more time consuming, but I used my box cutter to sort of whittle that insulation down. It's very easy to cut. You just have to be careful not to whittle into the wire and shred the wire. Or you can also just try to sort of cut through that insulation with the box cutter. But because it's such a tiny wire, I found it a little bit easier just to sort of weaken it, to whittle it. And then take some pliers and grab the wire and gently pull it through the insulation where you've weakened it, and keep letting go, clasping it again close to where you're about to pull, and pull it again. And that way you're less likely to break the wire. Now, I'm not wearing gloves, but I really would recommend wearing gloves because the wire tends to fray, and it is very sharp. If you touch it with your fingers, it will hurt. So that's one thing that I did, was just pull out the copper wire. But I also really liked the way it looked when I was whittling it. So for one of the shorter wires, what I did was I just shaved or whittled that insulation down to the wire in some places. The reason I liked it was, to me, it looked like copper with patina, because you get a lighter color green where you remove that sheathing. If you have wires that have a white sort of coating on them, I think that would look really cool too, the white with the copper showing through. But I thought that it gave a sort of nautical or coastal look by getting as much of that dark green off and just getting down to the copper in some places. So I did that for, as I said, one of the shorter lengths. I just shaved it. So here you can see what that looks like. So then the question is, of course, okay, great. Now what do I do with this? So what I decided to do was to make some wreath decor. But I know a lot of people make jewelry with the copper that they get out of old copper wires. So I would not be too inclined to put this next to my skin, but I think that it could be really beautiful in resin, or I could see using it as like candle decor. And in fact, I considered that, and then I decided I would rather do a wreath, especially if you maybe melt it into the edge of the wax a little bit. My concern would just be people touching it and getting hurt, but I'm going to show you how to mitigate that to some extent. So the wreath I have here is a pool noodle wreath that I covered with white fleece. And what I'm going to do is take some nautical rope that I got from the Dollar Tree. And I'm also going to take the green eyelash yarn, which I used a lot this season. And I also got from the Dollar Tree because to me this looks like the seaweed that gets wrapped around like anchor cords. And I'm going to wrap this around the nautical rope. So what I'm going to do is I am going to tape it at the end where there's already tape on this, just to hold it in place. And then I'm going to wrap it sort of inside the rope because the rope is 3 pieces of rope twisted together. So I can just sort of slide it into those crevices in the rope and sort of consistently keep it about 3 pieces apart as I wrap it around. So I'm going to wrap that around the entire rope, and then I'm going to need a little bit of another piece of rope as well. And once I have that done, I'm going to wrap it around my wreath with, I don't know, about 2 inches between. So just wrap it all the way around. And because this is a pool noodle wreath, I'm just going to fasten it to the wreath with pins in the back. And then what I'm going to do with the wire that I just sort of shaved so that I thought had a sort of a nautical look is cut lengths that are around between 6 and 8 inches. I think they were mostly about 7 inches long, and twist the ends of them into sort of curls and just stick those under the rope pieces. And what I ended up doing, I started with just one little curl under each piece of rope. And then I decided I would rather have 2. And I had enough to do most of the way around. And I left the bottom empty because we're going to put a bow down there. So for the bow, I have this ribbon, which I always think looks sort of like seaweed. And I've used it in white and blue and green before, but I also bought this color, which is sort of a reddish brown, and I got this at the Dollar Tree. And I am going to paint it with this bronze paint. So it's a bronze metallic paint, and I'm going to just paint enough that I can make a bow. Now, once that has dried, look at how close that color is to the color of the copper wire. So I'm going to use that and just make a simple bow and take a white piece of the same kind of ribbon and make a smaller bow on top and tie that in the middle with the green eyelash yarn. Now what I want to put on top of that is something that is decorated with the copper. So with the copper, first I'm going to just try to smooth it out with some needle nose pliers because it did shred a little as I removed it from the sheathing. And then I am going to double it up and twist it. And this really helps to make it less prickly and to make it look thicker and just more like a copper wire and less like shreds of thin copper. So I am going to twist it by hand. I'm just holding it with one hand and just turning it with the other hand or with pliers in another hand. I think that you probably could put it into a drill and hold it on the other end with pliers and run the drill very slowly, but I would be concerned that it would break. I even broke it just turning it with my hands. But you can see that as I do that and I smooth out any bits that are sticking out, I get a much more substantial piece of copper wire. And what I'm going to do with this, well, I have two pieces because I broke it, is I'm going to wrap it around this starfish that I got at the Dollar Tree when they come out with their coastal decor. I always pick up a lot of these starfish because they go very quickly. They're very popular. And so I'm going to wrap it around the legs of the starfish. And then I'm going to wrap some more of the eyelash yarn around the center of the starfish and use that to attach the starfish to my bow, and then also use it to attach the bow and the starfish to the bottom center of my wreath. Finally, I felt that the wreath needed just a little bit more, so I'm going to paint some faux pearls with the bronze paint and mix those with some white pearls. Put them on a little bit of florist wire. I have gold florist wire from the Dollar Tree, and just wrap that around the center of each of my curlicues. And I think this is a nice sort of combination coastal and holiday wreath. And I absolutely love the copper and the shaved copper wire components of this. Here's the final wreath. Now this last craft is with wrapping paper. So we got a present wrapped in this beautiful wrapping paper. You can see it's a sort of a taupe color with white and gold reindeer, trees, snowflakes, leaves. It's really beautiful. And this is not the first time I've had wrapping paper that I absolutely loved and I wanted to preserve it. So what I'm going to do with this wrapping paper is scan in the different components. And that works with a wrapping paper like this where you have motifs on a plain background. So I cut them out, scanned them in, cleaned up the images a little bit, and imported them into Cricut Design Space. Then I had my Cricut cut them on heat transfer vinyl in white and gold. And I scaled them to different sizes because they are different sizes on the wrapping paper. And then just using the wrapping paper as a guide, I placed them over a piece of gray felt and ironed them down. Now I considered using gold fabric paint, but I found that the gold transfer vinyl looked better. I tried it different ways. So you might have more luck with paints, like enhancing something that you transfer on with paint. But I did do like the bird's wing in the gold, and I did some snowflakes in the gold. Mostly I did white. And so I ended up with this piece of felt that was decorated like the wrapping paper, and I'm really pleased with how that came out. So what I'm going to do is make a gift bag out of this, because I would like to move away from wrapping paper somewhat, and I would like to slowly create a beautiful collection of bags and pieces of fabric that I can wrap presents with. So what I did with this one was I squared it off because this was a scrap piece of felt. So I just cut it to square it off, and then I cut it in half. And then I stitched it on my sewing machine along the bottom. I put the two halves faces together and sewed a 1/4 inch seam along the bottom. And then I folded that seam up and pulled the bag down around it. I'm imitating a gift bag that I have. And then I stitched along each side. So it's very simple, but now I have a bag with a flat bottom. I pushed it up about a ½ inch on each side, so I have about an inch on the bottom of the bag. And then to give it a nice finish at the top, I just sewed a gold ribbon around the top with some gold thread. And to make this a bag that can close, I looked through my button box and I found just a simple round gold button. And it's the sort that, I don't know the names of different kinds of buttons, but it's the sort that will stand away from the fabric a little bit, which is perfect. So I sewed that to the center of one of the sides of the bag. And then I took some more of the gold ribbon and I made a loop and I sewed that to the inside top of the bag. So you can fold it over and then you can just wrap the ribbon around the button as much as you need for how far you're folding it over. So this bag would be the perfect size for a paperback book or a video game, or in this case, I'm going to put some lint truffles into it. And then I tied another gold ribbon around the whole bag once I had fastened it up. So I hope that you liked these upcycle ideas for wrapping paper, Christmas tree lights, and clothes that aren't in good enough shape to donate. Please tell me if you had a favorite project, what it was, in the comments, or if you have other ideas for how to use these materials, or if you have a better way of getting copper out of wire. I would love to hear about it. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.